my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Well, it's a big good evening going out for me, Kervin, Julien. It's another week
Back in the day,
of Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
it was all about survival.
And this week, the year that was.
Too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the street. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good.
Riding alongside me tonight, it's the
Women and women.
ever-ready Dr. David Ramey.
The street. I was getting money.
And tonight,
Street. Now things have changed.
we take a look back on the year 2016.
Change, man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all.
We review some of the issues raised by some of the guests that we've had throughout the year.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
And then we look forward
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
to 2017.
Did my time. I paid for my crime.
In a week when another gunman goes wild at Fort Lauderdale, 5 dead and many more injured.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
In a week where black police brutality
More drugs and super fry.
reared its ugly head again in a
Supply. I'm not proud.
very unsavory fashion.
I'm telling my story.
In a week where another homeless man dies on the street.
Yeah, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back.
In a week where several of the American
Do it again.
intelligence services confirmed that Putin and Russia had a hand in the election campaign of Donald Trump.
Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than.
In a week that Tottenham Hotspurs beat Chelsea for the first time in 40 years.
Especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
In a week where many people have already broken their New Year's resolution.
Already did my time.
Or resolutions.
Already did my time.
We're right back here on Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
Already did my time. Paid for my crime. Already
We're going to talk about the year that was.
paid for my crime. Paid for my crime. Paid for my crime. Paid for my crime. Already did my time.
I'd also like to say a big thank you going out to our producer, Teresa.
I paid for my crime.
Does all of that hard work behind the scenes. I want to say a big shout out going out to the World Jam Global Radio management, presenters and DJs
Citizen
for their hard efforts,
all of my friends.
especially all the work that was done throughout 2016. Looking forward to a better 2017.
I was good with my hands and
And just in case you wanted to know, there are several ways that you can stay in tune and be in touch with the show and even contribute.
now things have changed.
Listen up closely, friends.
Rearrange. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand.
You can catch us on www.worldjamglobalradio.com.
Trying to
Get yourself registered into the chat room and you can interact with us live.
I paid for my crime.
You can also follow us on the TuneIn app if you have that handy anywhere,
Crime.
on any smartphone.
Already did my time.
You can join us on the Issues Today Facebook page, the Issues Today
Did my time. I paid for my
Twitter account, or the World Jam Global Radio Facebook.
paid for my crime.
Direct message, Twitter or email.
I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than super.
Email at issuestodayradio.com.
Proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you.
Or you can also follow us on our World Jam Global Radio Twitter also.
Now sit back and think it over since I got.
So there's several ways that you can stay in touch with the show and what's going on.
I was young and dumb. My brain.
And don't forget, the show is recorded and will be published
Me and Billy the
later on this evening.
I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
But whatever you're doing,
My time, paid for my crime. Already did my time.
it's that time of the week already. It's Issues Today.
Already did my time.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
World Jam Global Radio. This is clarity.
Well.
Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my honourable guest, my dear friend, riding shotgun as always, with a mouthful ready to tell you about what's going on in America today. It's none other than the irrepressible Dr. David Remay. Good evening, David. How are you, sir?
Kervin, I'm sitting in Connecticut, and that was a very nice introduction, of which I'm unworthy. I'm looking out my window where normally I see the quiet and calm movement of the great sea separating us from your little island over there. And today I can't see more than a meter in front of myself. We have a blizzard, very, very heavy blizzard, snow and ice and wind. I put my nose out the window to collect the dog, and I felt like I was Rudolph the Red-Nosed David all of a sudden. And there was a squirrel up on my landing for the bird seed, the sunflower seeds. I give the cardinals and wrens and all the ones that don't leave for Florida. And there's a squirrel sitting up there, and I thought, now he's monopolized that way too long. The birds are waiting, so I'm going to shoo him away. So I let my dog out, the beagle, and he took off after the squirrel. The squirrel had a heart attack and ran up the pear tree, and he stayed up inside the pear tree, hidden and camouflaged. And the dog was dancing around in the 1.5 feet of snow, barking like a maniac. And the paramedics came, and they didn't know who was crazier, me for letting him out, or him for chasing the squirrel, or the squirrel for eating the bird seeds, or the birds for being impatient. And I just said, this is a Meshuggah. I'm done with it all. Then I came in and I cooled off my feet, warmed them up rather, and I'm talking to you now. So that's my morning. That's my activity. And I have some good Jewish penicillin on the stove. For your guests who don't know what that is, it's chicken soup. Chicken soup is Jewish penicillin. It cures everything. Mother, I'm in depression. Eat chicken soup. I broke my arm. Eat chicken soup. I've got a headache. Eat chicken soup. I'm getting a divorce. Give chicken soup to your husband. Well, now, I heard some interesting things this week. First of all, Donald Trump, as you know, took credit for every good achievement President Obama has accomplished in behalf of this nation. In fact, the lower unemployment rate and the stock market going up 9% in the last month and a half, he's taking credit for that.
He hasn't got into the Oval yet.
Well, my problem is that when we had this shooting yesterday in Fort Lauderdale, 5 people murdered and 8 wounded, I didn't hear Donald come out and take credit for that. It's an odd thing.
It seems he draws the line somewhere.
Yes, and you know, there were there's this 3 Canadian goose had a heart attack and died in North Carolina. He didn't take credit for that either. Wow. And I don't understand when the North Koreans have threatened us with nuclear destruction. He doesn't take credit for that. He just says they won't do it, right? Like you won't go bankrupt. Now it's come out that his hotel in Washington owes about $5 million in back wages he hasn't paid people. Wow. You know, I think had he not been appointed president by the Electoral College, I have a feeling that his hotel would be headed toward bankruptcy now because nobody would stay there. And he thinks they're staying there because of his excellent service and friendliness. And of course, what he's staying there for is they're staying there for one reason, to win favors with the new president of the United States of America. Now, if we look at the year in reverse, the last year here, there's so many things that happened that are going to affect us, I think, for 2017 and on. And we can talk about these as we go along, but I'd just like to mention some of the ones that I think are really important, not in order of how important they are, but maybe important. I think the death of Fidel Castro in Cuba closed an era. I had mixed feelings about Fidel Castro. because he was a narcissist. He was a dictator, but he also did some really, really good things. I think probably that act of his, which he'll be most accountable for, is betraying Che Guevara, who he worked with. He sent him there with a death note to Bolivia, and he died. He was surrendered to the Americans, and I think that's going to be pretty harsh on him. I think the amount of doctors he created that helped many people, I think his victory in Angola for freedom was a very positive thing. I think his preservation of Cuba from the American exploitation and casinos and gamblers and prostitution and drugs was probably a good thing. But that betrayal and his refusal to lift some of the terrible restraints on freedom, the way he tortured gay people, people who didn't fit into his system, women, I think that's going to be a harsh judgment on Fidel. But that era in history is closed, and I have mixed feelings because now Cuba will be open to American exploitation, and we know what that's done for the rest of the Caribbean islands. Yeah. And I just wonder how long it's going to be until the forests of Cuba, which are the largest forest in all of the Caribbean, are stripped of their old wood. The seas are destroyed, the coral reefs are polluted, hotels go up, casinos are built, and the schmucks like Sheldon Adelson and the mob move in again. Anyway, that is a big change. I think the situation in Egypt, it was a very subtle moment at the United Nations when Israel ordered Egypt to pull back a UN resolution that eventually passed. I think it kind of showed the world that Egypt's president, al-Sisi, is in fact a Mossad agent and obeys Netanyahu. I think this is going to have some serious repercussions in the Arab world, especially if Trump follows through and moves the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is going to be extraordinarily offensive, and the King of Jordan has already declared would be a red line that would not be tolerated by any measure. I think we could see some very, very serious problems if that happens.
What do you think? What do you think is behind Trump's thinking in that plan or suggestion to move the embassy? What do you think is actually behind it? Do you think he's trying to provoke an international incident?
You know, I don't think he can think that deeply. I don't think he has any idea what he's doing. Jared Kushner, who is an Orthodox Jew and is married to Ivanka Trump, his daughter, is very closely affiliated with those who believe the West Bank belongs to Israel as Judea and Samaria. And he is the one who has put up this man, David Friedman, to be the ambassador. I think that Kushner is pushing this idea with Friedman and others because they believe there will be no end to this war until the Palestinians are completely and abjectly defeated, destroyed, ethnically cleansed, and out of the picture forever. They believe you have to clear the entire land of Palestinians. And to do that, there must be a serious provocation which will enable Israel to act with such a ruthless ferocity that it will be a de facto reality on the ground. And they are playing Trump into that field. But Trump hasn't an idea of what he is doing. It's those around him who are controlling him who are doing it. And I think that the American military establishment realizes the danger and have already called Israel a threat to America's national security. But when you have four major U.S. senators, Cruz of Texas, Rubio of Florida, Cotton of Arkansas, which was a nobody, and then Heller, who is a Sheldon Adelson senator from Nevada, when those four have introduced legislation into Congress that says all security for American embassies and consulates throughout the world will be cut in half until that embassy is moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This is the invitation of 1,000 Benghazis. And one has to question, Kervin, and I ask you too, what possibly could make American senators to introduce legislation that puts into jeopardy our own diplomats and our own U.S. Marines who protect those embassies for the sole purpose of moving our embassy 45 miles away? Explain that to me.
You know, I have nothing that I can offer in a way of explanation as to what is behind this thing, what could be gained from it. But there is one thing that I do want to say, and I want to go on record as saying this before we go any further. I want it to be known that this is what I said and this is what I think. You see, a lot of people talk about Donald Trump must be a smart man because he's made a lot of money. And I've listened to Donald Trump on several occasions in his public speaking. And Donald Trump is as thick as two planks. Right? I want to say this up front. Donald Trump hasn't got an ounce of intelligence in his toenails. And I say this because when you listen to him speak, when you hear him speak about international matters, worldwide matters, economics, world leaders, or anything that of any substance that matters in this world, he hasn't actually got an opinion on it. And I suppose I was absolutely gobsmacked when I watched the first, second, and I think in all the debates that they had. Because if I was somebody who was about to elect somebody as my leader, and he got up and spoke the way that Donald Trump does, within seconds, I'd have been, there goes my vote. I ain't going there no more. Because, do you know, when somebody speaks of politics, of economics, of international related issues, you expect them to speak with some sort of authority, some sort of knowledge, some sort of insight, something that can inspire and motivate you into getting a greater understanding of these things, because that's what politicians are supposed to do. They're supposed to be able. They normally twist it so much that they bamboozle us into being so fed up with not being able to understand what they're saying that we'll just agree with them anyway. But Donald Trump is so simple that you was able to hear just how thick he is. And anybody that didn't get how thick he is needs to go back and listen to every single broadcast or interview that the man has done and just listen to him speak. When people ask him a question, his response is that of what you'd expect from a 13 or a 12-year-old child who's probably going through mental health related issues. So let me just say this. I do not understand for the life of me how anybody can take Donald Trump seriously. And I can see clearly why there's a whole bunch of comedians and puppeteers mimicking him and making dolls and all sorts of stuff about him already. You know, because this man is an absolute joke to politics and world leadership. And how on earth, and I think we all got fooled. Nobody believed for 1 minute that he was going to get into that seat. How could he? But he did. And now he's there. He's actually brought this childlike mentality into politics, because that's what it resonates with me. It's a childlike mentality. On any subject that he speaks on, it's a childlike mentality. The way that he handled the Hillary Clinton. Let me just make my point here. Hillary Clinton was almost as bad a candidate as he was. But how he handled that actually showed just how stupid he is. And I've got to simplify it because the man is stupid. But he's stupid with a lot of power, with a lot of influence, and a lot of money. And unfortunately for us, money speaks louder than the sincere words of a good-hearted man. And the only reason Donald Trump has got as far as he's got is the size of his wallet, not the size of his brain.
Well, also, we have to say those people who elected him, remember 3 million more Americans voted for Hillary than for Trump.
Absolutely.
But the issue here is that this man he has avarice. I mean, he loves money. He's a bigot. He's a misogynist. He treats women terribly. I mean, to call himself a pussy grabber and to be proud of this. He's a racist. He's calling Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said he'd rather have a little Jew with a beanie on his head counting his money than a Negro. He is an Islamophobe. He doesn't like Muslims. He's a narcissist. He loves himself. And more importantly than all of those things is he lacks a fundamental human value system. He doesn't understand that human life is valuable, that life is a special gift from God, and it's not something to be used to make you money, to make you powerful, to make you feel good about yourself, to make you feel like you have a magnetic personality for women. It's not about using people. It's about understanding that you have a role in life and that maybe you have certain advantages or gifts that you have inherited from your parents as a wealthy person or from God. He says he's the smartest man in the world. He has the best IQ in the world. No one's smarter than he is. But let's face it, when you have to say you're smart, you're probably suffering from a very serious personality disorder. People know if you're smart or not. People know if you're a kind person or not. I mean, when you say that you don't trust the intelligence services of this country, men and women, and if you go to the CIA building, you'll see all these stars because they don't list their names, but hundreds of stars who have given their lives in the most dangerous, precarious situations ever imaginable for the safety of people like Donald Trump, who was able to buy himself 5 deferments from Vietnam. This is a hypocrisy, a lack of human understanding, and it does not inspire those who are ordered and by law commanded to follow your lead. When you don't reveal your income taxes, why should anyone below you? When you don't operate within a system of tradition and honor, why should anyone who works for you? When you treat people as if they're just means to an end, why should anyone working for you do any differently? These are the questions that we have to ask ourselves in relation to Trump. Whether he's dumb or not, we have to now deal with the fact that he has the power. And what are we going to do to curtail that power? What are we going to do to ensure he's held accountable when he violates our Constitution? You take, for example, a former congressman named Joe Walsh. The other day he said, quote, "For better or worse, I am not afraid to say it publicly. I think Obama is a Muslim. I think in his head and in his heart he has always been a Muslim. And I thank God for Donald Trump to bring us back to the real America." What is Joe Walsh saying? First of all, in our Constitution, if you're a Muslim or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, your religion is your business. So what does that have to do with anything? And secondly, he's not a Muslim. So who are you to lie about it? And I think that America is going to have to come to terms, Kervin, with our unlimited press. You know, in England, if you lie about someone, you can be sued for slander and libel really fast, and you can win.
Well, in fact, in America, America has a bigger trend for getting the lawyers and the lawsuits up for slander and stuff like that. But yeah, you're quite right.
Not really.
The
Very
thing is,
rare.
You can't actually get away with it as much. And I think the reason is, David, is that we actually have a better standard of human rights here in this country. We have a better standard of legislation and protection for individuals in this country. And I think, our parents and the people that went before us fought long and hard battles in the government to make the system much more fairer and equal for all in this country, that no longer can the few control as badly as they did many, many years ago. And the thing is, I suppose, but they've always said that England looks towards America to lead. But I'm going to tell you this, David. America doesn't actually lead us in much anymore. Because when you look at the police system that you have out there, it's pathetic. When you look at justice and how justice is meted out and how injustice is unchallenged, it's ridiculous. When you look at the battles that you're going for with Obamacare and everything else, and racial tension in this country may well still exist, but you can't get away with it anymore. In the workplace, on the streets, whether you're a law officer or not, you cannot get away with calling people whatever you feel like calling them because you don't like them. You can't get away with it in this country anymore. And that's because people have battled to make equal rights equal for all and not just for the few. And you would have thought that America, being the land of the home of the brave and everything else that it suggests that it is, they would have been on the forefront of this, but they're not. Your human rights in America is almost third world standard in comparison, and that's really unfortunate because it was always viewed as the mother country, the one that we all look toward, and bearing in mind it's still the most powerful country on earth. And yet,
one of the things is that we in America in the 1950s, the CIA did a study on authoritarianism, and one of the results of that study is that Americans, and I don't know about other countries really, it was an American study, have a tendency to accept authority that they perceive as being legitimately achieved. So once the Congress and government said Trump is legitimate, or George W. Bush was legitimate, even though in the eyes of many they're not legitimate presidents of the United States, but once they're determined to be legitimate, Americans fall in line. They're incredibly susceptible to obeying authority. And I know that myself because I've been chairman and president of many, many organizations. And no matter how much the membership may dislike a given president or chairman, it's almost impossible to get a majority to ever go against that president or chairman, even if he acts against their best interest. They'll say, well, we'll wait till the next election, we'll wait till the next time, but they will not move. That's why it is so rare in America to have a recall of a mayor or a governor, because people accept authority that they think is legitimate. And that's our problem today. And that's our problem with police. Police have authority in that uniform, and you will not get people to almost ever convict a policeman for a wrongdoing because they think he has the right.
When we talk about 2016, David, we did a lot of shows on police brutality. We did a lot of shows on unlawful killing. We did a lot of shows of wrongful convictions, and we even did a couple on the death penalty. And And we've had some good guests. Alex, as a superb guest that we and a good friend of the show. David Cooper. We had Justin Powers. We've had Cheryl Ford Dorsey. And many more of that caliber, who all talked quite powerfully about what needed to be done as far as reform was concerned. And you would think to yourself that in a year that saw almost 1,700 people innocently killed at the hands of law enforcement, whereby no evidence has ever been able to be put together and proven that these were in pursuit of any form of criminal activity. You've got to ask yourself, what power is behind a movement, an organization, an institution like law enforcement, that even with so much wave of concern going against it, it refuses to buck down and move with the times, so to speak. Now, I suppose that's not even a question, it's a bit of a statement from me, but bearing in mind what I'm trying to get at and what I want you to try and respond to is the fear, and we talked about it last week with Alex, the fear that must be going in a community where, because last week we talked about the Jacqueline Craig story, for example, where a woman called the police because her child had been assaulted by a neighbor, only to find herself being wrestled to the ground and handcuffed moments after the officer arrived. Imagine the fear in a community when faced with an issue. Who do they call? Who do they call? Who should they call?
Well, of course, it's the police, but Kervin, we must remember the police, as we have discussed on this show many times, and I agree with your analysis of our excellent guest. The police were first formed in South Carolina and in the South as a means to control African Americans. The whole purpose of the police was to use taxpayer money to collect runaway slaves for plantation owners. Now, if you just follow in the United States, and keep in mind that this is a white Christian country, that's who rules it. Now, today we do have other religions and we have other nationalities, but if you talk to the majority of people in this country, they will tell you at the drop of a dime, this is a white Christian nation, and it should stay that way. Now, 99% of the people who would utter such a phrase voted for Donald Trump. That's what he appealed to. Hillary was a woman. Hillary has black friends. Hillary is a lesbian, according to them. Hillary is a person who supports the first black president, Bill Clinton, according to them. Hillary worked for a Muslim, according to them, Obama. So these people vote. Now, the police are here to do the work of those people. So, for example, at the turn of the century, 1900, we had a soft drink in America called Coca-Cola. Mm-hmm. Coca-Cola got its name from cocaine. It had cocaine in it. It was prescribed at a pharmacy. Well, you didn't need a pharmacy. You just went to the pharmacy. Until the 1960s, a lot of pharmacies were called a soda stop because that's where you got your Coke. Now, later on, the white people used Coke, and there was no problem. But suddenly, when black people began to use cocaine, that became a problem because it made them work harder. It made them feel better. It actually induced them to achieve great things. And suddenly, it became a race issue. And so cocaine was used as a means to arrest blacks. The same applied to heroin in California. the white people began to resent the fact that Chinese were getting jobs in California, buying land, owning businesses, and achieving great things. Suddenly, the police and the law made it illegal to smoke heroin or to have heroin. And that was a way of arresting and putting in massive jails the Chinese and harassing them, just like they did the blacks in the South with cocaine and marijuana later on in the 50s. Mm-hmm. They have now, the best example lately has been with crack cocaine. If you had powder cocaine, you were probably a white guy on Wall Street making a couple $100,000 a year in those days, now millions, or a white suburban man or woman, and nobody cared. But if you were a black person smoking the cocaine, well, that was in crack form, which was actually a little bit weaker than pure cocaine, you got 100 times the penalty. So you had black people going to jail with life sentences for 5 bags of crack or whatever, 5 crack cubes, and a white person with 100 times more not even going to prison.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, under Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan and George Bush, you filled the American prisons. And the police did that work for them. So we can go all the way back to the 1850s when the police came on the scene to capture blacks and other undesirables in our society for the wealthy and for the majority until today. And this is what the police do. So when you, my good friend, look at America and say, how can the police do this? How can a woman whose 7-year-old child is being strangled by a neighbor call a policeman? And the policeman comes to her town and says, well, you ought to control your child more, and assumes the child is guilty of something for which he may not even be guilty, but nevertheless is a victim of an assault and battery and does nothing but puts the mother in handcuffs and takes her to prison. This plays out with exactly how policemen are taught to treat certain elements of our culture. And that is why in college you see 90% white faces, and in prisons you see 90% black faces, because the whites are here to run and profit from America, and the blacks are here to serve our interests. And when they don't, we're going to find a reason to make sure they don't interfere. So that's where we're at. And until we confront those issues, we're never going to be a country that lives up to the promise of equality that we proclaim to the world quite hypocritically. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, the thing is, what we're seeing today is still only a result of systematic behavior that's gone on way before. Let me ask you a question. Let's say, for example, there's a snake in your house. There's a real snake, a dangerous snake in your house. All right. Well, you know that snake is in your house. So you've got an option because your children are there and your wife is there. You don't want them to be bitten by that snake and die. So here's what you can do. You can hire 3 paramedics to wait outside your house in case of an accident. You can put lots of food to persuade the snake not to bite you, but to eat the food instead, like little mice and birds or whatever. And you can have an alarm system so that if a snake moves in the night, your alarm system will pick up the sensor. So you'll spend about, £500,000 a year protecting yourself from that snake, all right? Because you think that snake is really important to your freedom. Or you can pick the snake up, take him to the vet, and dispose of the snake and not have any expense whatsoever. What would you do? Well, I think a common sense person would do the second, don't you? Well, here's the thing.
Well, wait, let me finish. What would you do? Would you do the first or the second?
Oh, it'd have to be the second.
Okay, well, now put in America, instead of the word snake, guns.
Yeah.
Guns. Now, the guns are the problem, but nobody will get rid of the guns. They will do everything in the world, including putting millions of people in prison,
Yeah.
but they will keep the guns. Why? Because the guns are like the snake. It creates chaos so that the rulers can rule.
Yeah. And that is so true. I mean,
If you want to stop Fort Lauderdale, you don't let people get on a plane with guns.
yeah.
You don't let them buy guns. When a man goes to the FBI and says, I think the CIA is telling my brain at nighttime to contact ISIS sites and watch them on videos, and this man has been in a war in Afghanistan and could have PTSD or other mental problems from combat in a war that Bush took us to under lies, I don't think you let that man own a gun.
No. And here's the thing. Guns are far too easily available in the United States of America. And those that have it don't want to lose it. And those that don't have it, well, what a sad thing when the only thing that you could look forward to is the day that you can purchase yourself a gun. You know,
I have no desire to have a gun. I had a gun in the Army, and that was quite good enough for me. Real men don't need weapons.
No.
Real men do not need weapons. But America, today is my brother's birthday, and I was speaking to him, and he was asking me about this situation in Fort Lauderdale. And I said, I'm not going to discuss it with you. He said, what do you mean? I said, to discuss the issue of guns in America is like me spending a lot of time as a medical doctor talking to you about the different options we have for your mother who's going to die with brain cancer in 3 days. There are no options. The only thing we need to talk about is her will made? Do you know where she's going to be buried or cremated? And what other provisions would you like us to take when she dies? Because she's going to die. So why would I discuss all the options of cancer care, medicine, pain relief? Why would I discuss that with somebody who believes that she's going to live when I guarantee you the woman's going to be dead in 3 days? I'm not going to discuss it. So I am not going to discuss any aspects of gun control in America any more than I'm going to discuss the potential life for a person who's going to be dead in 3 days. It's ridiculous. America was founded as a violent, genocidal nation addicted to guns. We killed the Indians, we killed the Portuguese, we killed the Dutch, we killed anybody who interfered with conquering this nation. And we have been addicted to guns for one reason. They work. They work.
Yeah.
Our genocidal wars in keeping slaves in bondage, in keeping enemies out, and conquering the Native Americans, and defeating the Chinese and Japanese with their civil rights, our guns have worked. So they're not going to give them up. Forget it.
In 2016, out of all these shows that we did on police brutality or on unlawful killing, which one stood out the most for you? And tell me why.
I think the case of Sandra Bland was the most important. And I say that because at the root of all these police crimes against innocent people, I don't care if it's the police in New York strangling a man to death for selling cigarettes, a policeman in Charleston chasing down a man and shooting him in his back and planting evidence on him, policeman in Ohio shoot a 12-year-old boy playing with a gun in a park. I don't care about any of those sick people. They all suffer from the same problem the policeman who stopped Sandra Bland in Texas driving an Illinois car suffered. An arrogance of power, a sense, and Alex talked about this a lot too, a sense that they are above the law, that they are unaccountable, that their colleagues will cover up for them, that a citizen does not have the right and dare not exercise his or her rights under civil law, that you cannot question a policeman without offending him, and that he has the right to go so far as to drag you from your car or shoot you if you refuse to get out, like a case in Texas, and kill you. And that crime will be covered up unless someone has it on a videotape. And even then, more than likely, the policeman will get out of the trap he's in, because the union that protects policemen will pay any price to ensure that he is not convicted. He has the lawyers, the best lawyers in the world, paid by his police union, whereas the victim is normally an African American or poor Hispanic or white who has no money to lawyers, who has no access to justice, and who will be smeared with prior offenses that have nothing to do with the issue at hand, but as a means to bring discredit upon him or her in favor of the police. Even in Chicago, when a policeman shoots a man 16 times on a highway and it's filmed, even then that policeman is protected. When the police force should come out and say, this guy is on his own. We don't protect. We will not pay for the defense of someone like this. This is unacceptable. Yeah. So Sandra Bland is the case where I think the crime was non-existent. All she did was move over to let a policeman pass her. And the only thing she did was to speak like an adult American woman to a policeman who took that as offensive because she wasn't kissing his butt and bowing down to him, or as we say in the African community in this country, she was not shinning and grinning, showing her teeth like a chimpanzee waiting for a peanut. And for that reason, he drug her from her car, banged her head into the pavement, arrested her without cause, put her alone in a cell without her medication, and the next day she was found dead. That, to me, is symbolic of all the problems we face with police and law enforcement in this country.
I totally agree with you, David. And in order to hammer that message home, we were then to later have another guest. We was to have another guest that joined us live on Issues Today, who told a very similar story, which was heartbreaking, which was Antoinette Houston.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a particular show that broke my heart. I remember sitting there listening to her, almost in tears, if not in tears, as she told her story of how she was violated and abused physically and violently, and how her deep-rooted belief system was shook to its very core, how her understanding of justice and people was to be shaken almost forever. Bearing in mind that she had gone to accompany one of her students at a dance school at her father's funeral because the father had just died, and she had driven across states to support this woman who was just a student but wanted Antoinette to support her at her father's funeral. And so upon her return back to where she lived, she decided to stop off at a shopping mall and get herself a donut. And for that donut, that she decided to park in an empty car park because it was at 2:00 in the morning. What she was subjected to by that officer that approached her wasn't too far off what happened to Sandra Bland. I think only by the grace of God is Antoinette Houston still alive to tell her story, because this man was a very vulgar, violent man.
Very.
And what he did to her, I'm quite surprised that Antoinette was because she broke down, and not only did she break down, not only did I break down and cry, but I remember she broke down and cried too as she tried to relive those moments, those horrifying moments. And the unfortunate thing is, Sandra Bland can't tell us anymore what was going through her mind as she sat in that car, and that officer, tried to draw her out of that car and drag her out of that car, and she can't tell us how terrified she was at that approach and his approach to her and his behaviour and attitude and tone to her. She can't tell us that anymore. But we can measure it. We can measure it on the fear that Antoinette introduced us to. Because if Antoinette's experience is anything to go by, bearing in mind Antoinette would have been less resilient or reluctant because she had a child in the car. So she wouldn't have been as rebellious or giving him a strong enough argument. So she was very submissive to him in comparison. Because if Sandra Bland, being on her own, might have felt a bit more and without any responsibility, and I'm not trying to talk her down or talk bad, what I'm trying to say is because she would have had no responsibility, because there was no children about, she probably felt stronger, and she was an active member of activism. So she knew her rights, and she was going to stand firm on that. But imagine the fear that would have gone to her, because now once they've got her inside of the jail now, there's no longer public witness, to support her defense. So now she's left to them, and for them to, I can only imagine the fear that woman would have been put through prior to her dying at their hands, at their brutal hands. So I agree with you, David. I think Sandra Bland was a pinnacle turning point for us as a station, as a show. It opened our eyes and opened our mouths so loudly. If we remember correctly, we cut the tape on that one. We were the first to go there. We were the exclusives, and we went right in there. We didn't pull any punches. We went right in at the jugular. And
we had her sister on before anyone else had anyone on.
That's right.
And that was and then 3 days later it hit the main. But we understood early on that this was an immunity that policemen expect for any action. And I think that they're entitled to feel that way because the system, the American judicial system, it gives police officers a sense of total entitlement and immunity. And if there's any doubt, think of this last December when Michael Slager, who killed Walter Scott by shooting him in the back in South Carolina, when this man Michael Slager shot African-American 50-year-old Walter Scott by chasing him down and shooting him in the back and then planting evidence on him. And in the meantime saying that he was in, quote, total fear of his life. And then the prosecutor gets 11 white people and one black man from North Charleston to sit on the jury. Now, if you are calling a jury from a community that is more than 50% black, how do you wind up getting 11 of 12 to be white people? I don't understand that, because in my mind, 11 of 12 white people, you're talking about 92% rate here are white. And so you get one black person and you get 11 white people, and then you get a hung jury, which means the man is not even convicted when you have it on tape that he could not possibly be in fear of his life because he had weapons all over his body. The man was running away from him more than 100 feet away when he shot him dead. And then a consciousness of guilt, which is important in law, made him go and plant evidence on the man. It's a consciousness of guilt that makes you plant evidence on someone. So why shouldn't cops or police, why shouldn't they think that they will never be held accountable for crimes against citizens, especially African-American citizens? Let me ask you, what if he had done that to Ivanka Trump? What if Ivanka or Donnie Trump had been lying on the ground in South Carolina with planted evidence on their bodies? Do you think this man would be free?
Absolutely not.
Let me ask you, what if Jared Kushner, who's running the government of the United States now, what if Jared Kushner told a cop in Texas, I don't have to put out my cigarette butt, and was driven into the earth head first, put in a jail cell, and found dead the next morning? What do you think would happen?
I think there'd definitely be a judiciary response. I think the culprit would be locked away, probably be on remand, waiting trial for some time to make sure that he had the longest possible sentence he could possibly get. But,
So when the system itself is so broken, when a prosecutor, and I want to reinforce this, a prosecutor is the most powerful authority in the United States of America. A prosecutor can bring down a president. A president cannot bring down a prosecutor. A prosecutor, Kervin, you could come to America. You could go to Chicago. You could shoot 3 people. You could rob $1 million from Marshall Fields downtown. And if the prosecutor said, I don't think Mr. Kervin was totally normal, we're going to send him to a psychiatrist and then afterwards to a hospital, and he's never going to be prosecuted, no one on earth could change that prosecutor's decision. No one. If he does not bring you to a grand jury, you cannot be put on trial. On the other hand, if you came to Chicago and you stole $50 from a drug dealer, he could put you in jail for RICO trafficking in drugs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you wouldn't leave for 50 years. You would not leave for 50 years. And when one person in our system has that kind of power, referred to by the famous Justice Jackson, who was at the Nuremberg trials and sat on the Supreme Court of the United States, when one person has that much power in our system, that person can immunize the police force that is charged with ensuring white supremacy and capitalist overlords over all of us without any accountability. And that is where it must begin. Not in Congress, not with the president, not with grand juries, not with victims. It begins with controlling the power and making accountable the exercise of authority by prosecutors in this country.
Very true, very true.
And remember, prosecutors are law enforcement officers. A prosecutor carries a police badge. He has the authority to arrest people. A prosecutor is a Gestapo without a uniform.
And then we moved on. We moved on to Philando Castile. We moved on to Philando Castile, who was in a vehicle with his girlfriend when approached by an officer who claims that he fitted the resemblance, the identity of someone who'd just committed a bank robbery or robbery nearby, even though he had the wrong hairstyle, he was dressed totally differently, and looked absolutely nothing like the description that they were given. And then the officer approaches and asks Philando Castile for his identification. And as Philando Castile reaches for his identification, the officer empties his magazine into his body. I mean, and you've got his girlfriend sat next to him, streaming it live.
Right.
And still no justice.
Yeah. They said the DOJ was going to look into it.
Yeah, he needs to get a mirror. He can look into that all day long.
Right.
You know, but...
And she filmed it. I mean, it was a 10-minute film.
Yeah. And there you have it.
And it was over I believe it was a broken tail light that caused him to stop.
Yeah. But all of that was filmed. The entire conversation was filmed, and the discussion that was taking place as he was, you know, say what he was saying, and when she responded, and I can remember her curdling cry. But you asked him to reach for his ID.
Yeah,
you know?
You told him to get his ID, sir. She said, sir.
Yeah, you know, but I don't get how you still have a public who will claim that police brutality.
Remember, and there was a child in the car, remember?
Yes, there was a child in the car. But how would you still have a society, a community of people that still thinks that these Black Lives Matter related activists and activism hasn't got an argument or hasn't got a reason to protest, should just go home and say, yes, massa, no massa, 3 bags full massa? How anybody could watch that video, because it went viral, it went worldwide, everybody had it. How they could still not see the relevance of police brutality, harassment and racism institutionalized in a police force when you see something as significantly blatant as that video from Philando Castile's girlfriend. And I struggle with that. And you know, here's the thing, David, right? When we started doing these shows 2 years ago, as far as I was aware at the time, I was the only Englishman who was knowledgeable in the things that were taking place stateside, i.e. police brutality, unlawful killing, etc. And now, even when I'm at work, because I have a lot of people who follow me on Facebook and that, and even if they don't follow me or befriend me, because I've got an open public site, people come across it and view it anyway. But the amount of people that I've had come up to me and say, yeah, I've been watching them videos that you post and those articles of and yeah, I agree. But my biggest problem is so many people say they agree, but not many people are actually prepared to put themselves in front of that agreement. Show themselves, show their hand, show their face, let their voice be heard, because it's still the same usual suspects. It's still the same, 2 and 3 people that are making the noise all the time. And yet there are so many people who are supposedly in agreement with the Black Lives Matter movement as such. They understand the police brutality. They understand that innocent lives have been taken. They admit that this is wrong and something should be done about it. But it's not my problem. It's not happening to me. I don't even live there. It's not happening in my community. When do we as a people stop allowing an ocean, a river, a landing strip of an airport stand in the way of saying what we believe to be right?
I don't think that's going to happen. It seems to me people operate on the basis of survival, and self-survival is the most important. Most people are happy going to work, going to church, doing their shopping, going home, being entertained. We're not an educated people anymore. And as long as we're not an educated people, we will not have people who are not apathetic. Most people do not care about others. They don't.
This is true. I want to step away from police brutality for a while, because I know we were going to do the review in the first hour, and we were going to go forward in the second hour, but there's still some stuff that I want to get to.
Go ahead.
One particular video I saw, which broke my heart, melted me, and caused us to look into doing a show right into that area, was the Israeli soldier who took the bike off the little 8-year-old girl, telling her that the bike was stolen, and then chucked it in the bush. Do you remember this piece?
Yes, of course I do.
And we then went to the Gaza. We done shows with I think it was Carol Becker and Hazim.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about how do we get people to care, and then you're looking at something like what's taking place to Palestinian children, and an incident like that where a soldier can just bully an 8-year-old girl the way that he did, send her away crying, by taking her present, what could have been a present, a Christmas present or a birthday present or something else, but it was her bike. But then you find out the widespread damage that's being done to individuals, as we heard from Gaza when we visited it with Hazim, etc. And yet the world still stays silent. Why is that, David?
I think this last month, when the president abstained and allowed a UN resolution to pass regarding the illegal settlements in Israel, it was a break. It was a breaking point. And I think that it is a breaking point because Israel is going to overreact. If Israel thinks it can depend on Russia for its safety, it's sadly mistaken. For 50 years, Russia has always sided with the other side. Israel exists for one simple reason: the United States of America. Now, no one in the history of Israel has done more to damage the relationship Israel has with an American president than has Netanyahu, because he rejected outright an African-American president of the United States. Outright. And just this week, a minister in Israel called President Obama a Cushi. A Cushi is the Hebrew word for nigger. Nigger. Can you imagine that? Calling the president of the United States a Nigger. And other ministers there bragged on this, and they were happy with this. And then a leading rabbi supporting this minister said, "We have a new Messiah for Israel in Donald Trump." A new Messiah. Max Blumenthal said on his site that this is not only the verge of blasphemy, it is blasphemy. But you have people who have, as Netanyahu said this week, the army is the sole basis for the existence of Israel. Now, King David wrote in the Psalms that those who put their trust in spears and swords shall die, but those who put their trust in the Lord God shall live. But he has clearly chosen the anti-God side. He has clearly chosen military and force. Even generals in Israel opposed the 2014 Gaza war, in which 2,900 innocent people were murdered simply for political reasons by Netanyahu. Netanyahu almost took the world to war with Iran, which would be a disaster. How is a country of 7 million people in Israel going to fight a country of 90 million Iranians with a border attached to the Soviet with Russia? This is impossible. And this shows you the mental illness, the paranoia, the psychopathy of this man, who is supported by his own people, as America will now support a crazy person, Donald Trump. And it makes us question, what is wrong with our education system? And the answer is very simple. Just as the police are charged with the health and safety and protection of the American people, they are in fact enforcers and control agents and killers of those who challenge the people in power and who have a claim that they believe exceed that of African Americans and Hispanics. And the same here in Israel. The Prime Minister of Israel believes that white Jews, not even Arab Jews, not black Jews, but only white Jews have a claim to that land. And they are willing to do anything, even mass suicide and destruction, to preserve that land. And so, to answer your question, that bicycle and nothing that girl owned or her family owns belongs to them, not even their own bodies. Because in the minds of rabid Zionists, all of Israel belongs to Jews. And those Jews who only agree with the view of the Zionists are real Jews. And anyone else is to be destroyed. Remember this, Dr. Arthur Rupin, who was the founder of the Tel Aviv settlement in the 1920s, said this: Ethiopians are niggers with no Jewish blood, and their numbers in Palestine must not be increased. And the Yemeni Jews, those Jews who came from Yemen, are only suitable for menial labor. So Arab Jews, those Jews who are dark-skinned, and there are more of them now than European Jews in Israel, what happened is they would have babies, and their babies would be taken away from them and put into slavery because they did not want the population of the dark Jews to increase. Because in Orthodox Judaism, it is forbidden for a light Jew to marry a dark Jew. You can only have so much difference in skin color so that you can marry. A tall Jew cannot marry a short Jew. They have to be kind of the same. So this kind of physical racism, blood racism, this type of cruel irony resulting from a total unlearning of everything we learned about the Nazis is the most cruel paradox facing the world today. And the fact that the United States of America turns a blind eye to that type of cruelty in which children are killed in Gaza while playing on the beach, while praying in a mosque, while going to a school, while being attended to in a hospital, when people are put in chains and walls are built, and then those walls are now transported between Mexico and America through Donald Trump and through every police department, through the police forces of Israel, and through $38 billion grant to Israel by a president who is then called an Nigger, shows that the problem here, my friend Kervin, is not what you think it is. It is education. It is the education of the American people to prefer sports and entertainment, music and fake news, Twitter and iBook and Facebook and all these other things over facts and knowledge. These are the issues that any civilized society who hopes to advance must face. We have a problem in America. When I went to school, Kervin, I had to learn the presidents, the Constitution, the Gettysburg Address. I had to know it. Napoleon crowned himself in 1804. Waterloo was 1815. World War I was 1914 to 1918. General Patton was 4-star general. General MacArthur was a 5-star general. That the Constitution, Declaration of Independence was 1776. That Julius Caesar was the first Caesar, Augustus was the second, that Aristotle and Plato came from Greece, that Cleopatra was a Greek Ptolemy family ruling Egypt as a pharaoh. I had to know facts. And when I wanted to express my opinion, my teacher said, your opinions can be formed later. First, you need to know the facts. But today, children are taught that they're special. They're all winners. Knowledge is unimportant. Their feelings are important. Their opinions are important. They're glorious. They do a painting face with watercolors dipped in cow manure, and they're called geniuses. That their opinions are all that matter. That they don't have to think. They only have to feel and emote. That's what's important, that they can tweet something 100 miles an hour, and it doesn't matter that what they tweet doesn't make any sense. They don't have to know Shakespeare. They don't know how to do cursive writing. They don't have to know who the apostles are. They don't have to know who the prophets are. They don't have to know who Buddha is or Confucius or Tao. They don't need to know Beijing is the capital of China or London the capital of England and Great Britain. They don't need to know facts. You know why, Kervin? Because they feel. I feel this. I feel that. I don't care what you feel. Go feel with your wife or your girlfriend, or go feel when you break an arm. I want to know, when did the Civil War begin and when did it end? How many people died? Where was the major battles? And I want you to know these. I want you to be able to speak German or Spanish or French. I want you to be able to read a foreign newspaper so you're not inculcated with American mainstream media only. But we don't teach people. And therefore, when Donald Trump comes and says, the Russians didn't hack DNC emails, and you say, well, 17 intelligence agencies said they did. You say, well, I don't believe they did. Then an educated person says, you're full of crap. Get out of my way. I got a brick wall to talk to. And he doesn't win. But that's not where we are. Coal miners in West Virginia actually believe that Donald Trump is going to bring coal mining back to West Virginia. Well, you know what, Kervin? I'm going to illuminate the streetlights of London with whale blubber. I'm going to drive on the M1 to Oxford in a horse and buggy. And I'm going to open up a horse business in London because horses are coming back. And we don't need electricity because we've got kerosene. And by the way, why do we need sewers? I've got a nice little 2-gallon bucket here.
Wow. Wow.
The issue is education.
Absolutely.
That is the issue. It's not gun control. It's not banning Donald Trump. It's not civil rights. It's education. If you educate people, all those problems will solve themselves. Because if you learn, the Constitution of this country says, all people are created equal and are entitled to certain inalienable rights, then you don't need a civil rights law, because there it is.
But then what you need to do is get everybody to agree on that.
You're not going to agree on it, because the purpose of a bad education in America is the same purpose as the police, to keep the people under control, stupid, ignorant, and working for low wages. Let me give you something that will shock you to the core on social justice. I live in the state of Connecticut. There are 138,000 people in my state out of 4 million receiving Obamacare. That's the national health plan that the president was able to get passed. That cost the state, that cost the U.S. government $1.3 billion a year that they give to Connecticut, and we match it. Now, Republicans are going to do away with this. That means Connecticut will not get the $1.3 billion for 130,000 people on Obamacare. That means they will die. They will not have medicine. They will not have health care. They will not have mammograms. They will not have birth control. They will have no hospitalization or pharmacy, nothing. Now listen carefully. In my state, we have 8 billionaires. Those 8 billionaires are all in finance, not industry, finance. They make their money by shuffling money. Most of that money is in pension funds by hard-working Americans, from which they get a percentage. Their money combined is $49 billion. 8 people, $49 billion. Now, if you taxed those people, just those 8 people, 2% of that money, that would cost them about $2 billion a year. But that $2 billion would more than double pay the entire health care for 138,000 people in Connecticut. And instead of them having $49 billion this year, they would have $47 billion. Do you think it makes a difference to 8 people whether they have 47 or 49 billion? But our system of justice says it is more important for those 8 billionaires to have no taxes, than it is for 138,000 living souls to have a mammogram, an appendicitis operation, a healthy child, medicine for her Parkinson's disease. So there you have it. Welcome to America.
Wow. So that was America. And we can go on and on over show after show, issue after issue, incident after incident, dissect it and chew it up and spit it back out again. And we're
but Kervin, the question, my friend, is this. Why do the American people tolerate it? And they tolerate it because they're not educated. They're not educated. If we had an educated people, that means we would have a people who would not tolerate for 1 second that kind of injustice.
Yeah.
Because remember, those people don't get that 48 billion because they're smart. They get it because the law entitles them to profit in ways that no other country on earth would permit them to profit. Only in this country.
Yeah, very true. Now, we have just over half an hour to go. Before we move on, we also made a stop to Syria and Aleppo this year.
Well, one thing before we go there, I'd like to add on about that education. One of the problems we have in our country is voter repression. Especially poor and African Americans are denied the right to vote in 3 ways: harassment and misinformation, the lack of IDs from the state, ID profiling, and imprisonment. Once they give you a felony, you can't vote in a lot of states that matter, like Florida. 1.5 million African Americans are not permitted to vote in Florida because they've been in jail. But why shouldn't they vote? Other states permit them to vote, but Florida suppresses the vote this way. If 1.5 million more African Americans in Florida had voted, do you think Donald Trump would have won Florida? Of course not. So, are you there?
I'm here.
Kervin?
I'm here. I'm here, David. Can you hear me? David? David?
I'm back.
Okay.
The snowstorm must have done us in.
No.
Now, I want to explain one thing. We could solve the entire voter suppression ID problem with one stroke of the pen. Are we on the air, Kervin?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly, David.
Here's the thing. Republicans say they have to have voter ID laws. The purpose of the voter ID law is very simple, to suppress the African American and poor vote. So here's what we do. Every American has, from the federal government, a Social Security card. All you do is put a person's photograph on that Social Security card to identify who he or she is, like the carte d'identité in Europe, the identity card in Europe. Yeah. And if every American who has a Social Security card also had our photo on it, we would have a verifiable federal United States of America ID, and there would never be a question again. But guess who would deny any law that would permit such a card to exist? The Republicans, the very party saying people must have a voter ID to vote, say we will not pass a voter ID law from the federal government. Because as long as the states control the voter ID law, the states can determine which IDs are valid. So, for example, in Texas, where students vote Democrat, a student ID from a state university is not valid. But in Texas, where gun owners vote Republican, a gun owner's ID by the National Rifle Association, a non-government agency, is valid. Now, you think of that. Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Well.
Now go on to Syria.
You know, over 5 years ago, we were sold a war on ISIS terrorism. And 5 years later, my thought is this. Now that and I was really looking forward to trying to get a show out on what next for Syria, what hope for Syria this week, and hopefully we can do that still. We're still looking for a guest for that show, and Teresa's working very hard in the background to try and get that show off the ground. But I was thinking, now that you've bombed the hell out of Aleppo, right, and then you've just had the recent ceasefire. And you sent all the buses in to evacuate. What next for Aleppo? What's its purpose?
What do you mean its purpose?
Well, it's now a deserted, derelict city, bombed to death, evacuated of its people. What next? I mean,
well,
that was once someone's home. That was once a community.
Yeah. Well, Aleppo is still there. Of course, the problem...
It's only there with the pinprick on the map.
Yes, I know. It's horrendous what the Russians and the Syrians and the Israelis did. Aleppo is an ancient city, as is Damascus. I mean, it goes all the way back into the Bible. The people are suffering there. It's torn between Turkey and the Kurds and ISIS and Iraq and Israel and Syria and Russia, and the Europeans and Americans stood back. Obama drew a red line, and then the Republicans refused to endorse it, so he couldn't act without congressional approval, and then they condemned him for not acting. I mean, it's a circus. You have to look back. Syria is a part of the ancient Assyrian Empire, but Syria as a modern country was the result of the European greed over the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I. The Curzon and the Versailles Treaty people broke it up and created all these little countries and gave Syria to France and Palestine to England and Iraq to England and Algeria to France, all these problems. So it was European greed that created the problem. You've got a country like Syria where the Alawite president represents 5% of the population. And yet he's controlling 95% who are Christian, Sunni, and Shiite Muslims. Now Russia put its nose in it. And Israel, which has 2.5 million Russians who say they were Jews, work closely with Putin. And Putin and Israel have one goal. That is to hold up Assad, who is a Mossad agent, who is complicit in the occupation and annexation of the Golan Heights. If Assad fell, and if a real Syrian president from the Sunni or Shiite took over, that president would most likely demand the return of the Golan Heights. Israel can never have that happen. Never. And for that reason, Israel cooperated with Putin in Russia and Assad to keep that puppet on the throne, to keep the Golan Heights under Israel, and to kill everybody, and I mean everybody, who gets in the way. And that is the basis of the catastrophe in Syria, regardless of what anyone else on earth tells you. Because we know the Americans and Europeans do not get involved where oil is not concerned. And oil is not concerned in Syria whatsoever. Only water for Israel, that they have stolen and occupy illegally. And therefore, Americans and Europeans sat back and said, don't bother us with Iran and Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and we don't care what you do to Syria. And Syria has paid a tremendous price. But Assad has never for a moment doubted that he would win, because Putin and Netanyahu teamed up to ensure that he would, even if they had to kill every living creature in that country. And Turkey has contributed also to that disaster and used it as an excuse to create a virtual dictatorship now in that country.
You know, here in the UK, people are beginning to open their eyes to what's happening in Aleppo and Syria, and we are getting a lot more news coverage than we used to as to what's going on in Syria and Aleppo in particular. We've had quite a few programs on Aleppo and the attack on Aleppo, and a response from people in general here in the UK has now become one of outrage. They're beginning to realise the false war that they've been sold, because our government was 100% supportive in the invasion and the attack on Syria, and it took Tony Blair how many years to admit that they lied and they were given false information on the mass weapons of mass destruction when they went into Iraq. And I'm just wondering how long it's going to be before the documents are revealed and opened, where our government is going to admit that it was wrong to go into Syria. Because
they're not going to. And let me ask you this. You've got to think of the grand picture here. If I were Israel and I knew that my country is most often supported by strong Republican and conservative leaders who like to deal in weapons trading and big bombs and military defense and capitalism. If I knew my country was safest, not with people like Obama or Hillary, but instead with people like Bush and Trump and Theresa May and these kind of right-wingers, the alt-right in France and England and now coming up in Austria, and Putin, don't you think that nothing would please me more than to see a war that I instigate with Russia in Syria to send 1 million Arab Muslim refugees to create chaos in Europe, to cause people to elect the right wing who then will support me? Look, in England, you went out of Brexit largely because of immigration. That was the number one issue, immigration. You wanted to control your own borders. As a result, you lost David Cameron and you got Theresa May, who now has passed a law in England to say to criticize Israel is against the law. To support BDS is against the law. To do anything to question a Jew or Israel having superior authority in Great Britain is against the law. There's a virtual ban on free speech in England about Israel. Do you think David Cameron would have passed that, or Tony Blair? As bad as they are, they would not have passed that because they would never concede to the alt-right. And yet, even in America, Congress is passing laws, states are passing laws. Canada passed a law. If you advocate for action against Israel, for its brutality against Palestinians in Canada, you can be arrested. You can be arrested. And in America, in New York, they passed a law. Any corporation that refused to deal with a West Bank occupying company in Israel can be banned from doing business in New York State. So the Israeli refugee crisis of 1 million Muslims into Europe did its work. It allowed Putin to have supreme reign as the great white nationalist defender. Do you know how many white KKK members and racist and nationalist, the alt-right in the United States voted for Trump because he's a friend of Putin? 85% said that Putin is a better leader for America than Barack Obama because Putin would protect the white people. Putin would protect the white people. Think of that. Now that is what 1 million Syrian refugees did to help create a fascist movement in Europe and America that is guaranteed to support Israel at all costs. A little country of 7 million paranoid, nuclear-armed, illegal people are basically controlling the greatest empires of the world. And you have to ask yourself, why? And it all goes back to a lack of education. Baptist preachers in America, evangelical preachers in America, screaming at the top of their lungs that if you don't support Israel, God will desert America. And so they go and vote for these Republicans who now want to pass a law to cut security for our American diplomats and Marines in every embassy of the world by 50% if we don't move our little ass embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. There is a problem. There is a problem in Denmark, and it's far more than fishy. It's gangrene.
Mm. Very true.
Do I make sense to you?
Oh, David, you make beautiful sense to me. It's poetic sense. And I just wish that we can just, if we can get the whole world to contribute and participate on one of our shows, it wouldn't take long for us to be able to change people's opinions about many things. We also, last year, we had truthers on our show, and we had the likes of Tony Sayers and Tripper Simons. We talked about the trans-specific partnership and the genetic food contamination. That's all gone a bit quiet on the social media front. But is that still a big issue?
I think it is, but I think even more than the food issue is going to be the climate control issue. We're looking at a situation right now in Bangladesh, for example, where tens of millions of people are going to have to start moving off the coastline because they're drowning. We have islands sinking. We have New Orleans threatened every day. Miami is building walls. The whole coastlines of the world are going to become Venices. We're going to have to start, instead of having Uber and taxis on wheels. We're going to have Uber and taxi with paddles, like they have the gondolieri in Venice. The Paris negotiations reached a great treaty, but the follow-up conference couldn't achieve anything because the Republican Congress refused to accept any binding commitments. You have people saying in this country, well, why should we control our pollutions if China doesn't? But China is. China just made a commitment to invest $300 billion in environmental friendly energy. China is now the biggest producer of friendly energy in the world. And we have people in Pakistan and we have people in India who have no clean water to drink, but they've got nuclear weapons out of the gazoo, but they can't feed their people. They don't have clean water for them. We have Israel, the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea has been living as the Dead Sea since time immemorial, and now it's shrunk up. Probably in 10 years, it'll only be a puddle there. There won't be a Dead Sea anymore. They'll start building settlements in the Dead Sea. I mean, it's drying up, and that's poisonous water because the Jordan River doesn't flow into it anymore. The Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret, it's going to dry up. You have 8 million people drinking water in Israel that's designed for maybe 300,000 or 400,000. And what are they doing? Building desalination plants all over the coastline and dumping the horrible killing minerals into the Gaza area and killing out the entire fishing industries of the Gaza, and the people are starving. You have Africa that's being bought up by the Chinese and cut down millions of acres a year of forest land. In Brazil, the same. In Argentina, the same. They just passed a law to limit the amount of land you can buy. In America, we're going to build a wall between Mexico and the United States that's going to stop immigration of animals and wildlife. It's going to change water supplies. It's going to change the entire environment as we know it. And then what are we going to do? We have a crisis in the world for climate control, and the Republicans deny it. They say that humanity does not contribute to climate change. But we see the Arctic cap is melting. We see Antarctica collapsing. We see Alaskan glaciers disappearing. We see in my own lifetime in Switzerland glaciers disappearing. We just had our first snow in Connecticut today. And normally snow comes here in October. Why are we letting icebreakers and oil ships go through the Arctic cap of the North Pole? Why? You know what? Have you ever tried to freeze water? If you put water in your freezer and every 5 minutes you open up the freezer and stir the water up, it'll never freeze. It'll never freeze because you keep stirring it up.
Absolutely.
When you stir it up, you create energy. Energy creates heat. So why in the winter and summer do we let icebreakers go stir up that ice and water up there to allow the sun to penetrate the water, to create more heat underneath, and to melt the entire North Pole simply so that oil and cargo ships can save a day or two on a trip? They ought to have their heads pulled off those ships and sunk into a whale's mouth 500 feet below that ice. But we don't care. People don't care. You have Japan out there killing whales. Why do you have to kill a whale? Why do you have these big ships running over whales and killing them? Why do you disturb the ice? Because people don't care, Kervin. And what do you think Donald Trump is going to do with this Rex Tillerson as his Secretary of State? He's going to work with Putin, and they're going to drill for oil, ExxonMobil in Russia, oil under the Soviet Arctic North Pole, and they're going to leak that oil, and it's going to pollute the entire environment up there, and our world will collapse. It will collapse. And I don't know, from the poor people of Bangladesh who are being moved off the shore, to the people in Peru who are suffering under massive floods in the Andes because of the ice melt, to the North Pole collapsing on us, warming our seas and drowning Miami and other cities like New Orleans, to earthquakes all over Central North America because of the fracking. And what are we going to do? And we let these people rule us. And they come out and say, God doesn't mind. God is a Christian. And God loves Republicans. That's what they say. And that's what we have to deal with. And I don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes I was talking to a guy the other day. I said, I feel like being a Buddha, climbing up the hills and living in a monastery. He says, yes, but Buddha came back. I said, well, that's him. I'm not.
We've probably only got about 15 minutes left of this show to talk about some of the things that we did last year.
I'm glad somebody keeps track of time.
Yeah. I think lastly, before we go into 2017, one of the more positive stories that we did, one of the other treasured guests that we had was Denise Watson from Ladbroke Grove, Notting Hill, and she told a tremendous story of recovery, of resilience, of courage.
I loved her.
And she talked about her life of abuse, drug addiction, and the fight and the journey that she went through as a child, growing up into her teens, and the battle that she had to overcome the demons that was her addiction. And when you think about our society as it is today, and how easy it is for people to get their hands on drugs, and you've got doctors and pharmacies that are quite quick to prescribe drugs that are opiate based, that are very addictive. Do you think that we're ever going to get to a place where they'll take ownership and responsibility for the drugs that have been put onto the streets, that have turned ghettos into absolute slums? Because let's just get it right. Black guys ain't scientists. Who was it that sat down and came up with crack cocaine? Oh, let's just go and get some powdered cocaine and we'll go and cook it up and we'll go and do this and we'll go and add that to it and we'll get some crack cocaine. And I mean, I can't, so you hear about all of these conspiracy theories that are, these things were put together and then sent into the ghetto. How did those things just only end up in the ghetto areas? And it was only when they started to reach the streets of the suburban society did you see them coming out of the woodwork and wanting to put a stop to all of this. How do you see our communities being set free from this drug addiction that seems to be a real pain and a real taker of life in our modern day society?
Well, first I want to say Denise Watson is an amazing story, and I read her book and I shared it with many people. I loved her story, and I did a review of her book and I published it for her. So I like Denise. Your question as to drugs. Drugs are a means by which the government keeps from the workforce healthy, potentially smart and talented African Americans. Drugs are the means by which they keep the prisons full in these for-profit prisons. Drugs are the means by which the police forces have an excuse to keep their numbers high, to keep their budgets high, and to confiscate the property of thousands and thousands of Americans every day, and to enrich themselves and the politicians for whom they work. So my question to you is, if I want a powerful and large police force, if I want a large budget and well-paying salaries for that police force. And if I want laws to enable me to confiscate billions of dollars monthly from people I accuse of drug use, why would I ever want to change it?
No. I agreed. I mean, the bottom line is we're fully aware of how much money.
Well, there you have it.
The institutions
Guns are a means. Guns are a means to keep chaos so that nobody can focus on the government. Drugs are a means to keep the poor people, and especially African Americans, in for-profit prisons and the justice system active.
You know, when you think about it, in reality, 2016 was one hell of a drab year. With 10 minutes left to go, what hope can we offer for 2017 to all our wonderful listeners right across the world? What hope can we offer in these areas that we've spoken about? Issues today, yeah, we talk about the issues that we relate to our basic human rights and the protection of that, and anything that would appear to attack that. But surely there has to be, every cloud has a silver lining. There's lights at the end of every tunnel. I want to offer our audience a glimmer of hope. What can we see as a better tomorrow for 2017? Do we just hope that we'll see less police killings? Do we just hope that we'll see less wars? Do we just hope that we'll see less bombing and acts of terrorism? Do we just hope that we'll see less of governments invading countries and absolutely destroying them? Will we see less refugees stranded and then left abandoned? What can we see for 2017, David?
Well, I think that we're looking at a lot of fear and we're looking at a lot of hope. I think that, just succinctly put, our biggest foreign dangers for the world will be Iran and North Korea. If Trump abrogates the Iran deal and allows Israel to bring us into a war with Iran, we will have a world war. And then everything else we're talking about now means nothing, because all those blacks in American prisons will be released to fight in the military. We will have a world war like you have never seen before. That's number one. Number two is Korea. Korea is a danger, a minor danger, but Korea has the possibility of wiping out Seoul in South Korea very easily. And that would cause America to react, which would cause China to react, which would then give Russia the opportunity to take any and everything in Europe it wants to take. So that is a real fear. And that's why I hope Angela Merkel or someone like her stays in charge of Germany. I think on the domestic issue in the United States, we're facing two primary issues in 2017. First is Obamacare. What will happen to 30 million people being covered by Obamacare when the Republicans cut it out? That will cause an upswell in America, unequaled since the large days of union protest in the 60s and 50s. And I think it will forever alter America. The second is taxes. If Trump follows through with cutting the taxes on the wealthiest Americans, and spending $1 trillion in infrastructure and increasing the military, as he's promised, and creating a catastrophe in the healthcare industry when 30 million lose their insurance and hospitals have to cover them and they go bankrupt, I think you're looking at a catastrophe never seen before, and maybe a debt increase of 10 to 20 trillion dollars. So those are the two primary domestic issues. The hope is Europe. If Angela Merkel and some European leaders can get together and separate themselves from Trump and create a modus vivendi for peace in Europe, 600 million Europeans, and exercise a strength of will against Putin in Ukraine and the Baltic states, I think you could see Europe and China working together to significantly curtail that golden gas tank called Russia. Russia is nothing. 80% of its income comes from gas and oil. So 150 million people, and most of them don't even speak Russian. So I wouldn't worry too much. The hope is Russia. The hope on the Chinese side is that China will continue to pursue friendly environmental moves in the area of energy that will outdate American fossil energy to the extent that Congress must move to accept the new methods of creating clean energy and put an end to the fossil fuel industry running our government. And that would be a very positive development. And finally, I would like to say that with the attack on women and minorities in doing away with Obamacare, there may form a new coalition of people in this country that will vocally and actively protest, and it starts with the Women's March on Washington, protest the government of the elite, by the elite, and for the elite in a way that will change America. And that will also curtail the powers of the police and drug-inducing capitalists who profit from private prisons, the drug trading, and the other corrupt activities that go along with it. So that's the negative, and also, I think, the positive. The key is to keep active, not to be afraid, and never fear to speak the truth, regardless of the fake news. If we don't begin to laugh at people like Trump and make a mockery of him, they will continue to take themselves seriously. And a man like Donald Trump and those who support him have no right whatsoever to be taken seriously by anyone with a third-grade education.
Well, amen, and thanks to that. Well, David,
what do you think? What is your hope?
My hope... My hope is to see less police brutality, to see less innocent people shot down by police, to see cities like Aleppo raised back up to its former glories, to see refugees return home and live the lives that they were purposed to live, and to see people taking the opportunities to live life in a much more upful and encouraging way that allows us all to hope for better things to come for our children who are yet to come after us. The next generation, we are creating a deathbed for the next generation, and then we're expecting them to come and bail us out of it. We're not leaving a good legacy at the minute. In fact, what we're doing is we're creating a generation of bitter, resentful, hateful people who can only prolong the wars that are taking place around the world. And unless we change very quickly, I see terrorism and wars and violence being the order of the day for many more years to come. I'm not trying to preach fear into the lives of anybody else, but let's just get it right. When you look on the streets of Palestine, on the Gaza, you're seeing children that are already being made angry and because they're losing their fathers and their mothers. When you go into the streets of Syria and places like that, you're already seeing the next generation of terrorist bombers because no one can explain to them why the playgrounds that they used to play in, the schools that they used to go to, and the homes that they used to live in have all been bombed down and turned into rubble. We're not leaving a good legacy. And unless we change the way that we approach the world dramatically in the very, very near future, I can only see this horrible existence that we're living get even worse. That's how I see it. But anyhow, we've got 40 seconds left to go. I'm going to say that, it's been a great night. It's been an absolutely fantastic time catching up with you tonight, Dr. David Remay. And I look forward to being with you again next week, where I think we're going to actually have Carol Becker back. And we're going to be talking, I think we're going back to Palestine. I think we're going back to the occupation.
Good.
And I think that you're going to love it. So thank you once again, my dear friend. But like clockwork, we are going to have to go now because
Kervin, let me say, you're my dear friend. I look forward to seeing you in England soon. And think of me on Thursday. It's my Geburtstag. It's my birthday.
All right. Just a quick reminder before we go. It's Tony Sayers next week and Carol Becker the following week. We're out of here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.